project management assignment in this class. This is largely what milestone 1 is based on. So defining the project is obviously very important, and we have to take it from not only saying what your project is, but break it down into smaller, more obtainable goals and pieces that you can, like a framework that you can add some meat to, if you will. So kind of a skeleton that we can build upon. So there are 5 general steps for collecting project information. They're listed here, and we're going to break them down throughout this slideshow. So step 1, define the project scope. Step 2, establishing project priorities. Step 3, creating the work breakdown structure. You'll see that abbreviated as WBS. Step 4, integrating the WBS with the organization. Step 5, coding the WBS, the work breakdown schedule, structure for the information system. So how does it fit within your existing organization? So let's talk about step 1, defining the project scope. The project scope is a definition of the end result or mission of your project and a product or service for your client or customer, so your end user. This defines the results to be achieved. They need to be specific, tangible, and measurable. And we talked a bit about that in a previous chapter about SMART goals, being specific and measurable and achievable, and have a time frame. And the more you break this down, the more you get into the detail. I've already got some questions from students. Hey, how detailed should we be here? As detailed as possible, because that's going to make your project more obtainable and more sellable to whoever it is that needs to approve it. So what's the purpose of a project scope statement? It's to clearly define the deliverables for the end user. So what are you trying to achieve with this project? The direct focus of the project purpose throughout the life of the project for the customer and its project participants. So it's like, okay, you have a team of 5 people. What is person 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 doing within this project? And then what are they doing next week? And what's your schedule for this? And what are going to be the costs? All right. The purpose again of a project scope statement is to be published and used by the project owner and project participants for planning and measuring project success. Now, there's a checklist to a project scope. It's 1 through 8 here. Project objective, product scope description, justification, deliverables, milestones, and I've used that language throughout this course in terms of what needs to be achieved. Technical requirements, limits and exclusions, and acceptance criteria. What results are acceptable for the good or service you're trying to produce. Project scope. Scope statements are a short 1 to 2 page summary of the key elements of the scope of the project, followed by extended documentation of each element, so you do get into the details. It's also referred to as statements of work, or SOWs, SOWSs. There's a project charter. It's a documentation that authorizes the project manager to initiate and lead the project. We're just assuming you've been chartered to do this project in our class. We're mimicking that, what would happen in our corporate world. This often includes a brief scope description as well as such items as risk limits, business case, spending limits, basically some parameters from which you can do your project, including how you can compose your team. There can be issues of scope creep. It's a tendency for project scope to expand over time to get bigger and bigger and bigger, usually by changing these requirements above specifications and priorities. So sometimes we have something in academia called syllabus creep, and with every semester we think, I should put this on my syllabus. And then before we know it, our syllabus is like 40 pages long, so you have to guard against that. You have to do the same thing when you're doing a project. So you have to be really careful that you stick within your scope and don't start expanding into areas that have nothing to do with your original goal. 5 of the most common causes of scope creep: poor requirement analysis. You get way too broad. You don't drill down. Not involving users early enough. We've talked about that in class a little bit about you've got to get out in front of your end user. You can't hide your business idea. You can't hide your project idea. You need to talk to them from day one, because there might be something you're thinking about doing that nobody wants to buy. There might be something you're thinking about doing that just does not have a market. Underestimating the project complexity, you get way too broad. That's why I'm always in all my classes saying, hey, get specific. A lack of change control and gold plating, i.e. giving it features that, you don't really need. It doesn't have to be fancy, but it does need to be a good idea that's well thought out. Step 2, establishing project priorities. 3 major criteria or trade-offs that a project manager has to manage are cost, that's the monetary budget; time, that's the one thing you can never get back, so make sure you have a schedule; and performance, so what is your actual scope? So again, if you get too broad and you don't drill down exactly where you want to be, that can mess up your priorities. You can start trying to be too wide and you end up turning in a project in the end to your supervisor that has a lot of breadth but no depth whatsoever. A project manager can manage the project trade-offs by completing a priority matrix for the project and identify which criteria is as follows. Constrained, that's the original parameter is fixed, so that's why when you set your goals, you stay there. Enhance, a criterion that should be optimized. So let's say if we have a constraint of 5 project objectives. Of the 5, what are the one or two that we really want to enhance? And then accept a criterion that is tolerable, not to meet the original parameters. So like kind of your secondary things. The reading does a better job of going more in depth here than I am in this limited lecture. So I expect you to complete that reading as well. Jumping on to step 3, creating a work breakdown structure. Now this is something you'll see a lot of in this class moving forward. Work breakdown structure is a WBS. It's a hierarchical outline of the project with different levels of detail. It identifies the products and work elements involved in a project. What needs to be done, right? Defines the relationship of the final deliverable, the actual final project, to its sub-deliverables, and in turn the relationship to the work packages. Basically, this is breaking down your work from big scope to nitty-gritty. What does each person do and why do they do it? Serves as a framework for tracking cost and work performance. We'll look at a graphic here in a few slides that makes this a little more apparent. It's best suited for design and build projects that have tangible outcomes rather than process-oriented projects, although I would say processes is great if you can add some structure to them as well. Now, this isn't the one I was just referencing, but this just breaks it down. So basically at a higher level, level 1, you have the project. So like what you would like to do with this complete project. You say, okay, to do that, we need some deliverables. Here are the major things we need to do. To do those deliverables, we need support. So we need sub-deliverables. And then we have a lowest sub-deliverable, which is like the day-to-day. So as you can see here, we're moving down an organization. And you'll see it here in a second. There's a few slides to go. The cost account, once you start, the biggest challenge in a project is putting cost to it. But once you get your head out of the clouds and you have this one business project you want to do for a corporation, but once you start breaking these things down, it gets a lot easier to assign costs when you put things in very simple terms. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here in a second, I promise. And then you can break down the work down here that says, hey, here are the things that we need to do. Okay? This breakdown group work packages by the type of work within a deliverable and allows assignment of responsibility to an organizational unit. Basically, it makes an idea have goals, yes, but then objectives, yes, but to meet your objectives, you have to do these handful of things. That starts to become people's jobs, and when people can do their jobs, then it can support the overall project goal. So how WBS, work breakdown structure, helps the project manager. It assures project managers that all products and work elements are identified, there's no surprises. It integrates the project within the current organization. So think organizational chart and how do we fit in there? Is this a special project? Is this a matrix? We've talked about that previously in class. And establishes a basis of control. This facilitates the evaluation of cost, time, and technical performance. What are these things that we have to do on the day-to-day as we break it down in the organization over the life of the project? This affects how many people you need to hire, how many people you need to assign to the project, etc. Provides management with information appropriate to each organizational level, allows them to lead with strategy. It helps project managers to plan, schedule, and budget the project. This helps in the development of the organizational breakdown schedule. Now, this is something that we're going to integrate in with the WBS. It's called the OBS, Organizational Breakdown Structure, which assigns project responsibilities to organization units and individuals. Without even knowing it, you've been doing this all along. Hey, you take this part of this milestone. You take this part and I'll do this part. It provides the opportunity to roll up or sum the budget and actual costs and through smaller work packages into a larger work elements and ultimately a price tag on how much the project's going to cost. It defines communication channels and assists in the understanding and coordinating of many parts. Much like most of the courses I teach, I'm just trying to get you to think. And within that, you need a structure to help you think and organize your thoughts. So, ta-da! Remember how we said, hey, we start at the top with this big idea, okay? And then this is some kind of tablet that the reading uses, and I'll let you get some more information there. So we had level 1. We go up here, level 1, the project. Then we have deliverables, sub-deliverables, lowest deliverables, cost account, work packages. We're working to that structure here, okay? So this tablet that we need to produce, we need a prototype. It's got hardware, it's got a CPU, which can include software or, well, CPU, wouldn't that be the functional stuff, the operations of it, and then more items, maybe software or whatever. The hardware, you need a frame, you need cameras, you need speakers, you need antenna, okay? Then you need all these components to make a frame, cameras, speakers, and antenna. Power supply, you need a battery, and then a charger. Flash ROM, you need this component. I/O controller, so USB, internet, touchscreen, that type of thing. These are extra features. So you need a keyboard, touch sensors, I was going to say blacklight. Those are cool, but no. Backlight to your screen, and then a resolution so that you can see it. You need all these components. So everybody's like, hey, I want to make a tablet. Well, you got to break it down, everything you need, and then you find people who can provide, and suppliers who can put these things together. Then you design how you manufacture them, and then you have a quality control, and then you start to add the big pieces all together, and they all come together, and then you have a tablet, okay? So the idea here, we want this output. What are the inputs we need? Well, you got to build the bridge here. You got to, I'll tell you what, I just had an idea. If I start seeing stuff like this, these types of work break structure breakdowns in your milestones, ooh, that's going to result in some good points for you. Just a hint. If you're actually watching this lecture, you should be, and doing the reading. So, a work package. It's the lowest level of the WBS. So it's down here, okay? It's the lowest level. A work package, lowest level of the WBS, is a short duration task that has a definite start and stop point, consumes resources, and represents costs. So as you break things down, these are high ideas, like, hey, I don't know how much this tablet's going to cost. Just guess. No. Start down here. How much does it take to put all this together? And then you end up with your costs, and then you add profit margin to that, and you know what to charge for it. So it's the lowest level of the WBS, the work package that is, shortest duration. You got to use your resources, and it has costs. Should not exceed 10 work days or 1 reporting period. So in general, this should be something that you can take care of pretty quickly, okay? Should be independent of other work packages as the project. So this looks an awful lot like an org chart, right? All right, so you have like CEO types up here directing their VP types here, who's working with their manufacturing heads here, who then passes it down to the engineers, who then passes it down to the workers. Okay, so each one of them is independent in their work packages. The basic unit is used, so when you break this down, now you can plan, schedule, and control the project. You know what you need to be able to do the frame. You know what you need to be able to do the keyboard. You know what you need to get the right resolution. So what you need to do is take your projects and come up with a structure like this and break it down. And listen, if you can come up with something like this, you could write for days on it. These milestones are going to take care of themselves, and this is kind of like the outline to your paper. So each work package in the WBS defines work. Like, what are we doing? It identifies the time to complete the work. How long is it going to take? It identifies the time, phase, budget to complete the work package. How much is it going to cost? It identifies the resources needed to complete the work package. Okay, how much of this input are we going to need? See how it breaks it down? Like, hey, we need more input for the camera. We need more input for the backlight. Keyboard's pretty straightforward. Frame's pretty straightforward. So identifies how many resources we're going to need. Identifies a single person responsible for the unit works. Who's going to oversee it? Identifies monitoring points for measuring progress. How well is it managed? Okay. Step 4, integrating the WBS with the organization. This is where we take the WBS and add the OBS, which is the organization breakdown structure. You're like, hey man, this is a lot of acronyms. Get used to it, man. Corporate American business, everything's acronyms. WBS plus OBS. The OBS, organization breakdown structure, depicts how the firm has organized to discharge the work responsibility. You guys have organized as a group to take care of your group projects. Provides a framework to summarize organization unit work performance, identifies the organization units responsible for work packages, and ties the organizational unit to cost control accounts. Again, we start breaking things down, it gets a little easier to put some costs on it. Pardon me. Went too far forward. and ties the organizational unit to the cost control accounts. The intersection of a working package and an organization unit creates a project cost point and cost account that integrates work and responsibility. Basically, you're breaking it down to make it simple, even though this does not look simple. So you have the WBS right here, 1 through 5. This is what we were just looking at. And remember up here, we broke these down into inputs and what they needed. Here is your project management matrix here. So you have your organization. Let's say you have someone on this team that's working on a tab that works in design, quality control, production, and outsourcing. Like all these little components up here. How much, let me go back here a second. How many do we need to outsource? How many can we make in-house? You can do the same thing with your projects. I don't care what they are. You can break this down into a matrix. Now, this leads us into, and the book does a pretty good job of breaking this down a little further. And if you look at it, imagine you had 5 rows here, and that was each member of your team. Who's going to be focusing on frame? What do we need to get cameras? Remember how cameras had more inputs? Look at this. They have more there. Well, remember backlights had more inputs? Well, look at that. Keyboards were pretty straight, right? So it's pretty inexpensive. Frame was pretty straight. All right, it's pretty like one unit, right? One input. Well, with cameras, you had more, and backlight, you had more. You have different components of your project that are going to be more complex and harder to do. A, you need to be able to define the scope of your project. B, the different parts of your project. C, who's going to do your project. And D, how many resources are going to need to pour into each part. So it's going to take a little bit of thought, but you know what? That's the point of college. It's a little bit of work. Step 5, coding the WBS work breakdown structure or schedule for information systems. So this is the final step. Like, how do we integrate it? WBS coding system defines the levels and elements of the WBS involved, organization elements, the work packages needed, the budget and cost information, and allows the report to be consolidated at any level of the structure. So if you break the thing down, let's imagine the project is making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Okay, well, pretty much the title gives away the ingredients and the instructions. You need peanut butter, you need jelly, and you need bread. Are we just importing or outsourcing rather the jelly? Is it grape jelly? How do they make the jelly? Are we just buying it or are we making it ourselves? Okay. Peanut butter. Are we growing the peanuts ourselves? If not, where are they coming from? Are we just buying the peanut butter from someone? Where are you buying it from? How much does it cost? You can get a cost with peanut butter, making it, or just buying it. You can get a cost with jelly, making it, or just buying it. Same thing with bread. Then, who's putting the peanut butter and jelly that is your project together? How much total does it cost? What kind of profit do you want to make? Add that to your total cost, and there's the price of your PB&J. So if you think about it in that terms, basically everybody is making a peanut butter and jelly. It's just that your inputs are different. Okay, so you've got human labor, you've got the raw inputs. Are you making those raw inputs? If so, how much does that cost? Are you just buying all these things pre-made and putting it together? Does that give you a cost savings? Does it cost more? So you got to break things down. All right, where were we? Coding basically means like, and the reading goes in this much longer than I want to do on this particular lecture, but it means breaking it down and allowing every level of the structure to or understand fully what it's going to take to produce this product. WBS Dictionary provides detailed information about each element of the WBS. In other words, each element, bread, peanut butter, jelly, what kind of tools are you going to need to put together? Are we going to put it on a plate? Do we need a butter knife? Are we going to cut the joker in half? If so, how much does that cost us in manufacturing? Not to get overly simplistic, but I like using simple examples to explain how you manage anything within business. And, whether you're making a BMW, a wedding business, or a restaurant that sells upscale peanut butter and jellies, there's a lot of the same inputs. Now, process breakdown structure, PBS, is used for process-oriented projects. We kind of went into that when we were talking about making a sandwich there. It's often referred to as a waterfall method in the software industry. There's a lot of service in the software industry, and then you produce an intangible product that's then downloaded. But there's a lot of physical inputs that it takes, just like we were talking about making a tablet. You have to do the same thing to make Microsoft Word. This is a process-oriented project. Is a project that has a final outcome as a product of a series of steps and phases. You need to define what those steps and phases are. That's what I'm looking for in these projects. And the project that evolves over time with each phase affecting the next phase. So they're dependent upon one another. Think about an assembly line. what gets done first, what gets done next, what gets done in the middle, then what gets done 3/4 of the way through, and what is my final project, and what does it look like, and how much does it cost to produce? And that tells me as a manager whether or not I should invest in this project. The project is driven by performance requirements and not by plans and blueprints. We're not building a house here. We're making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, if that helps you. Now, here's something that you guys have already been talking about. It's responsibility matrix, RM. It's also called a linear responsibility chart. You're in a group of 5 people. It summarizes the tasks to be accomplished and who is responsible for what on the project. Divide and conquer, right? Many hands make light work. It lists all the project activities and participants responsible for each activity and clarifies the interfaces between units and individuals that require coordination. It provides a mean for all participants in the project to view their responsibilities and agree upon their assignments. Those things should be pretty balanced. If you have somebody doing all the work, they're going to slay you on the peer review, and that's going to hurt your overall grade. Clarifies the extent or type of authority exercised by each participant. You guys need to get together and say who's doing what. Okay, so let's say you're in a group with Richard, Dan, Dave, Linda, and Elizabeth. Okay? R means you're primarily responsible for this. Richard identifies target customers and develops a draft questionnaire, and he finalizes the questionnaire. Dan's going to pilot test it, but he's also going to work on the results and prepare a draft. S means support. So Richard's going to support Dan, as is Dave and Linda going to support Dan on preparing the final draft of the report, preparing the draft of the report, so the rough draft, and then Richard's going to be in charge of, with the support of Dave, of finishing the final report. Now, each one of your milestones has different steps, and I've tried to keep them around 5, so that, if you're in a group of 5, that allows you to divide things very evenly. So Dan's primary here on about 3 things. Dave is supporting a lot of stuff, but then primarily responsible for input response data. That must be something that's hard to get. It's like these things are pretty straightforward. That's why he's got 4 R's and 1 S. But it sounds like to me they want Dave to focus on the input response data, so gathering data. That might be something that's pretty hard if he's got the 1 R. Same thing with Linda, who's going to physically receive and monitor the return questionnaires, but then supported by and supporting other areas. Elizabeth's responsible for printing the questionnaire, mailing labels, and mailing the questionnaires, and then supporting the receipt of the data. So each person has responsibilities, and support. This is how, group projects A to Z should be organized. People should have primary responsibilities, and then other people support them, yet, they all have something that they're carrying their weight on. Project communication plan that addresses the following questions. What information needs to be collected and when? Who will receive this information? What methods will be used to gather and store information? What are the limits, if any, on who has access to certain kinds of information, and when will the information be communicated, and how will it be communicated? Steps for developing a communication plan, stakeholder analysis, identify your target group. Information needs. What's the project status reports? What are deliverable issues? Changes in scope. Does something change as you get through there? Do you have regular team meetings? Is there gating decisions? We talked about in a previous lecture of going through these gates before a project moves forward. I would encourage you each to have a responsible party and a support person who follows up and says, this isn't good enough. You didn't do hard enough work on here. You need to go back. We can't turn this in, or you've slacked on your part. It needs to be better. You need accountability partners. Can we accept the requested changes? Are there action items? Can we create a milestone report? You better in this class. Sources of information. Where does this information come from? Dissemination modes, hard copy, email, teleconferencing, SharePoint, variety of database sharing programs. How are you going to organize it? The responsibility and timing. Sorry about that. Determine who will send out the formation and when. Who's going to turn in your project? All right. Let me go ahead and tell you something. If I see something in your milestones that looks like this, that you've got a responsibility matrix, and if I see something that looks like this, or this, I'm going to be a sucker for your paper. It's going to get a high mark. Listen, that's a 30,000-foot view of Chapter 4, defining a project. You cannot skip the reading. You cannot skip your responsibilities. I'll catch you in Chapter 5.